herrlich leuchtet mir die Natur, wie glänzt die Sonne, wie lacht die Flur. Es dringen Blüten aus jedem Zweig und 1000 Stimmen aus jedem Sträuch. O Freude, o Wonne aus jeder Brust, o Hild, o Sonne, o Glück, o Lust. O Liebe, so golden schön, wie Morgenwolken auf jenen Höhen. Du segnest herrlich das frische Feld, in Blüten dampfe die volle Welt. O Mädchen, Mädchen, wie lieb ich dich, wie blickt dein Auge, wie liebst du mich. So liebt die Lerche Gesang und Duft und Morgenblumen in Himmelsduft, wie ich dich liebe mit warmem Blut, wie du mir Jugend und Freud und Mut zu neuen Liedern und Tänzen gibst. Sei ich glücklich, wie du mich liebst, sei ich glücklich, wie du mich liebst, sei ich glücklich, wie du mich liebst.
As you heard just to play first was the poem that will be read later. It was a piece from Beethoven, and it was called My Lied. Our next part of the service is pretty much about her life, about Helga Angeli's life, my Nona. Our Nona. And part of it is remembrance of music and family. In our family, mostly Nona always said there were times in her family that they got together and they played their instruments. She had an uncle that played cello. Her mother and other members of the family would all gather, and they played this piece called the Kol Nidre. She always wondered why their family was so drawn to this piece. This piece is actually an opening prayer to a Jewish service. And they were always open for religion and everything. So as we are listening to this open meditation and viewing pictures from her life, we are meditating on her family's song, Kol Nidre.
Welcome. Welcome to St. Paul's and all those that are viewing online. We welcome you to the celebration of life for Helga Angeli. We would have, We had originally planned something else for this day, but unfortunately that didn't come to be, so this is the day that she would have celebrated her 100th birthday, and we're glad that you are able to enjoy it with us and celebrate her life. And yeah, that's it. We'll talk later, but right now I guess we're going to say our prayer. Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us as we pray. Heavenly Father, thanks for Helga's life and Nona's life, for family and friends gathered here to honor and celebrate. To honor and celebrate her life. Thank you for bringing us all here. Thank you for continuing to bless all those in our life. But we especially honor and thank you for now having Nona be in your arms, in your Heavenly Father, where she is with her family that has gone before her, as you will hear and see in her story. And again, we just bless this day. And happy birthday, Nona. Amen. As we continue our celebration, there's going to be tons of music played and sung. In particular, this next hymn, she was religious. She was a Christian. She was confirmed a Lutheran and later on became Catholic. But she always remained in her faith and in the Word. She would always ask us when we would come visit her. She was like, what was the reading for that Sunday? What was the message? What was sung? In picking music to share part of her life, we decided to do a hymn that would be a familiar tune for her, even though she would have sung it in German. So if you would all then be able to join us in singing a hymn, Beautiful Savior, in her memory.
Beautiful Savior, King of creation, Son of God, and Son of Man. Truly I love thee, truly I serve thee, light of my soul, my joy, my crown. Fair is the sunshine, fair is the moonlight, bright the sparkling stars on high. beautiful Savior, Lord of the nations, Son of God, and Son of Man. Glory and honor, praise, adoration, now and forevermore be thine. Glory and honor, praise, adoration, now and forevermore be thine.
And once again, I want to welcome everyone here and online. This new virtual world that we live in has made it perfect for all the people that couldn't make it around the country, maybe around the world, that have joined in. So I'm going to give a little presentation. I retired at the beginning of this year, and this is my first presentation since I left my office. So I've always been more of a visual person, don't put a lot of words on the slides, and just like to talk to it. And sometimes I don't know exactly what will come out, and you will hear it just as I will. And as I was laying in bed this morning, I was thinking of Allman Brothers' song Rambling Man and Led Zeppelin Ramble On. And you'll see that this story of my mother is that they moved around a lot. They rambled on. So I was wondering if it was going to be more that story or me rambling on. So, and so I always thought, if you know your subject, that makes things so much easier. And yeah, sometimes it works that way. So with pictures, I decided to do this because we just started looking at a lot of pictures and other things, and there were a lot of questions, and I said, oh, well, I'll just ask my mother, and no, that's not going to happen. So there'll be a lot of unanswered questions that we may never find out, but we'll see. And so this I called Helga A Life of Thirds, and my perspective, because I'm looking at the pictures, I've heard a lot of stories, and I'm going to come up with an interpretation of that. So, like has been said, this is her 100th birthday, and we wish her a happy birthday. Whoops, sorry. So we will begin then with the beginnings, shaping the next slide, please. Beginnings, shaping the future. So, 100 years ago today, a little girl was born in a quaint little town in Bad Neuenahr, Germany.
it was surrounded by hills and vineyards, and it was a very cultural place. There was music in the Kur Park. People from all over Germany came there and to use the spa to be rejuvenated, get some healing from the mineral water. Even Beethoven had lived there with his aunt for a while. So I'm going to show a couple pictures of Bad Neuenahr, and you saw a few in the slides. And just to show then, a little part of her town, and focusing on what was, the main focus of the town being a bad, being a spa. And so it being a little resort, and all the functions that go with that, including a casino. And next slide. Yeah. Okay. Where are we? Yeah. Okay. So, no. So, sorry. Is that? Yeah. So also, near the town was the Nürburgring. So maybe some of you that are sports car fanatics or whatever, that it's a special place in Germany where a lot of the German companies and other automobile manufacturers bring their cars to do testing. And there was actually a time when I went up there with my parents 50 years ago, that they allow people with their own car to go on there. And so my dad drove us on there. And I don't remember if he nailed it or, what we did, but I guess he was thoughtful that there were people in the car. So there's the mineral water, and you may have seen it in the stores. It's called Apollinariswasser, and it comes out of the spring right there in town. And there's actually a geyser, and so we'll find out if. So we can, I guess I can continue, and they catch up. I guess that's also the thing of the virtual world, that things go wrong. I'm on mute. I'm sorry. Yeah. Zoom. So outside there is a poster, and also a link to the poster online of her friends and family that I tried to capture through many different types of photographs. Can't put everyone in here. And knowing that after a while you would all be tired of my voice. And but please take a look at it when you get a chance. And outside in the lobby is also, at the guest book, a drawing triptych that was done by my son Wade of one of the photos that we will see. And I can't remember if it was in the slideshow yet, of her picking oranges when she got to California. And so you can go see that. So her parents, they came from different parts of Germany. And that is one of the questions that I have is, how did they end up in Bad Neuenahr? I'm not really sure. But my grandmother, Helena Wilhelmina Hamschmidt, came from Koblenz, which is where the Mosel comes into the Rhine River. And Bad Neuenahr is about 5 miles from the Rhine River, where the Ahr River comes into the Rhine. And Bonn, which was once the capital of West Germany, is about 20 miles away. And her father was Friedrich Hammerschmidt, and so they had 4 children, the first being Horst Lorenz, and then my mother, Helga Dorothea, and then Friedrich Karl, who had a nickname of Fritz, and then Heinrich, who had a nickname of Heinz. So you saw in the slideshow several of the pictures that I will be showing in here. There were actually a lot more pictures of that she had than I actually realized that. And now, with digital photography now, we just are overwhelmed with pictures. So. Can you hear me now? Yeah. So it was mentioned by Michelle that she grew up Lutheran. The Lutheran church was just near where she lived. And both her older brother and she got confirmed there. And we know that because we have pictures of it, of the gatherings afterwards. And so. Does anything happen? Yeah. So she grew up with her brothers, 3 brothers. So to be participatory of some of the things they did, she ended up being a little bit of a tomboy, and but they played their foosball and their soccer, and but she had her other things that she did, and that was the ballet that you saw. You saw some pictures there that she performed when she was 10 years old. So this presentation's not quite as visual as I thought it was going to be, but but visualize it in your mind, yes. So there were 3 parts to this presentation, and this. Aha. Next. So this picture up here on your top left is the Coor Park, and you can see a band stand there. And so they had music, and so back then they didn't have radios or TV, so music was done live. And so that was one of the things that Michelle talked about, was that the family, they played music, and they had that. But they could also just walk over to the Coor Park, which they were very close to, and listen to the music of the different bands, capellas that come there. So she did pick up, started playing the accordion, and she had that for a long time and brought it around with her, but found it a little hard to do sometimes, to really put the time toward it. Okay, next. Okay, so this is the family I introduced. Horst, Helga, Friedrich Karl, and Heinz, and the parents. Next. Let's go back so I don't have to keep on looking. Yeah, so just a little, two little pictures here of first one, Helga and her little brother Fritz, that was a year or so younger, and her older brother Horst. And then on the bike, her two younger siblings, Friedrich Karl and Heinz. Next. And so at the confirmation, you'll see that the whole family and a couple of other relatives are standing there. So, but in the right picture, you see only three of them in 1935. That's because the youngest son, Heinz, died at the age of 5 in 1931 from a disease that had left my mind at this moment. And next would be the Lutheran Church back there then in the 30s, and then how it looks today. Lots of walkways. They closed the streets to cars. Next. Let me make sure yeah. So the foosball, the brothers played that, and the little one in the bottom there, Heinz, was an honorary member because he wasn't really old enough to play with them, but they let him participate. So next is her ballet, and I mentioned she was 10 years old when she did this performance. You'll see on some of these pictures words written underneath. She was given an album by a good friend of hers who wrote little sayings and stuff underneath the pictures. And we tried to translate some of them. Some of them don't really translate. That was the thing we heard from my mother so many times is, there other nationalities, they have sayings that don't really translate. So, but I think you understand tango. So, next. So one of the things, big things, and I didn't realize that she was part of a Turnverein. So these were centers for the cultivation of health and vigor through gymnastic exercise. This gentleman in the early 1800s started this, and it spread across Europe, and they had different connotations socially and politically over time. I don't know exactly how this one was, but we're going to focus on the gymnastics and the body, and so with the ballet and the body. Next slide are some of the positions she was in with a friend and trying different things here, and like the one saying of the one in the middle where she's bent over backwards, it says you need something strong to put a mirror on, so I guess she was the stand. And so it probably meant something to there. But on the bottom right, being thrown up in the air as a practice for ballet. Next. So in 1936, the Olympics were held in Berlin. And as being part of this Turnverein and another regional squad, she had been picked to participate in the opening ceremony at the Berlin Olympics. So she was there. Next. So we saw some pictures of horseback riding, and that's one thing that she continued to love throughout her life. Next. So she went to the university. She did go to Vienna University first for about a year, and then went to Gdansk, which she calls Danzig in German, in Poland, and where she got a degree in physical therapy. And she was with the other nurses. They did a variety of things with, working in the hospital, the Longfur City Hospital, and also that middle picture of going to the beach with the wounded soldiers, some that are amputated, and doing physical therapy with them, which she continued later when we lived in Alaska, of teaching the amputees how to ski down the mountain. Next. So Gdansk is right on the Baltic Sea, and it was a beach. And Bad Neuenahr was very far from the beach, but she realized that she really loved the ocean and the beach. And throughout her life, no matter where in the world she was, she wanted to go to the beach and just be invigorated by the ocean and the sun. And so these are pictures of some of the people, and her mother came and visited her a couple times, because this was during World War II, so it was during wartime. Next. So she got her degree in 1944. The war was still going on, and she was able to come home. And at that time, when she came home, I already mentioned her youngest brother had died, but her oldest brother went missing in action in Russia in 1942. And her Fritz, her next brother, was killed on his 21st birthday in the Battle of Anzio in Italy. And her father was an interpreter and was working, I think, with a construction firm, and they were in Russia. And they bought 2 horses and a cart, and a couple of them took that from Russia and had some visa passports and papers to show that they bought it and that they can come through. And he finally made it back, and then about a year later that he died. So all of the men in the family had died by 1946. So it was just, next slide. So it was just my mother and grandmother. But she did have her friend, you saw in the fur coat, her good friend Rosal. And she was one that she and her husband opened up the first department store in Bad Neuenahr. So during this time, she worked at the International Field Hospital, which was actually the spa, the hotel, the kitchen, the restaurant, the casino was turned into an international field hospital to take in the troops of different nationalities. And she has quite some stories from that time, and that I'm not going to relate right now. Okay. Next. So we think it was during this time that she met this man. He was an American. And you can see the sign there. It says U.S. Finance Office, but it says American Red Cross. So that may play a further role in what she does later in life. But they met in 1945 in August. And then he moved away, got transferred up to Marburg, and he said, I'll be back. So, well, he did. He did come back, and they visited quite often. Next slide, please. And they went to different places, and before her father had died, my dad had asked him if he could marry his daughter, and he said yes. And in my lifetime, that's happened to me too. So I have a similar story. Yeah. Next slide, please. So they did get married in a town called Bad Nauheim. And so this was in 1947. So the war had been over for almost 2 years. And so his time was coming up to go back home. But he ended up sending her home sooner than he came home. So she came to America by herself. And next slide, please. And his parents and his sister and her husband came and met her in New York City. And they stayed there a few days touring the city. And New York City was a little different than Bad Neuenahr. But I think going to Danzig, it being a bigger city, that she really started really liking cities because of all the action, the entertainment, different things going on, more lively. So, next slide, please. So they weren't there very long, and when he finally came back, he couldn't stay there. It was time to move on, and so they started their journey west. He got stationed in Omaha, and they bought a trailer out there and lived in the trailer and got to live in the snow in Nebraska, and then later in the summer in the 100-degree weather without air conditioning in there, and no running water. So, but that's where Landy, my brother, Orlando, was born. And my father was away at school in St. Louis, so he wasn't there. So she called a taxi, and the taxi driver came. He says, "Don't worry, I've done it before." Delivered, so. Okay. So they were there for a little while, and then, next slide. They headed toward California, and my mother had heard about California, but they made several stops along the way. There they are, pulling the trailer, and there's the picture there of her with the oranges. And the bottom right is with a friend of hers who she met while she was out there, called Lillian. Her name's Lillian, who would play a major part of her later years of getting back together again. She had gotten married later to Harvey Bernhard, and who was a producer who produced The Omen, The Goonies, Lady Hawk. And so she was able to go on set for those and travel to those places. And so that was a good part. And I mentioned about the picture out front. So, next slide. So, hop, skip, and a jump. So they went to the Philippines, and when they were getting ready to leave, I guess when she was ready to board the ship to the Philippines, they called my brother's name, and she says, "Well, here he is," and well, we don't have your name here. You can't go. Yeah. So she ended up having to go through staying in California a while with Landy to get a visa to go, and took a lot of different jumps over there, Hawaii and many of different islands, taking space available flights over there, and finally met up with our dad in the Philippines. And this is a part of the time that I'm not too familiar with. Landy should know more about it, but when you're 1, 2, 3 years old, you don't quite remember as much either. But but this will be something that I will need to further my research with my brother. So from the Philippines, they were there for a little while, and next slide, please. and it was off to Japan. So they were in the west there to, I guess, the Far East, in support of the Korean War. But he did not have to go to Korea. So he was on the sides doing the finance part. So they did a lot of different things there, and this was when she actually got her certificate for the Red Cross. And from 1950 off and on to 1979, in many different places that she lived, she worked for volunteered for the Red Cross, using her medical abilities. And at the bottom right, it's showmanship, modeling, Landy. Next slide. Oh, speaking of modeling, so in 1950, that's when that picture was taken, and these other pictures that they had taken, and this one in the center was appeared in a book, in a tour guide for Japan at that time. Next slide. And she did some performing. You saw these pictures. And I think it was that they were doing Oklahoma. And so this is one thing, wherever she lived, for a long time, she was always into dancing and just tried a variety of different music. Next slide. So they were in Japan for a couple years, and she picked up something, and they didn't know what it was, and they evacuated her from Japan quickly and went to Valley Forge in 1952. And that's where she is in that top left picture. Landy and my dad stayed for a little while longer because they needed to get everything packed up and get ready to come home. So she ended up being in the hospital for 14 months, and Landy ended up staying with his grandparents, who lived in Pennsylvania, Old Forge, Pennsylvania. So that center picture is she was allowed to come out of the hospital and have a picnic, and some of the people of the family, and there's some nuns, and they asked Landy to say the prayer, and he started saying the prayer, and then he broke out in a song. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yeah. Okay, so next slide, please. So she did get out of the hospital, and they stayed in Valley Forge for a little bit, that my dad was able to get stationed there so he could be close to her. And they went back to Old Forge and got Landy. And while they're at that time, Oma, my mother's mother, came to the United States. My dad, unbeknownst to my mother, he had made all the arrangements and the visas to have her come live with them. And so she became part of the family who ever so often did go back to Germany to be with some friends. But next page. So then it was on the road again. And so they went to Atlanta and was there for a little while, and it was off cross-country, road trip, and hitting a lot of different places. You could see on the map here, the Corn Palace. My mother talked about the Corn Palace quite often, out in South Dakota, Mitchell, South Dakota, and then Mount Rushmore, and Mount Rainier up there in Washington State, going to Tacoma, got stationed at Fort Lewis. Next page. And then a child was born, and that was me, in 1955. And so I originally this was going to be the end of the first part, but I've added some more. I decided to drop the second part, and there was just so much that I decided I couldn't really do it, and that the other parts would be of your memory, because a lot of you had been touched by those points of that time frame. So here we are in Fort Lewis, and even though I was born in May, my brother had his birthday in July. He was allowed to still have his birthday, and he did. And then the next picture is my first Christmas, and the family unit that we had for many years with my grandmother living with us. Next slide. But, of course, it's time to move again. So before we were going, they were getting ready to go to Panama. They were looking forward, nice warm weather, it's going to be nice. And just a few weeks before then, my dad said, no, we're going to Alaska. And they freaked out. So, because my mother said they bought clothes and this and so my grandmother decided that she was going back to Germany. She didn't want to go to Alaska. So it was just the four of us that went up there. And in the right picture, I'm with Landy, and he's wearing cummerbund, and he was getting ready to perform a piano recital of Habanera. And so it turned out that my grandmother did come and stay with us in Alaska, and then she realized that if she knew how nice Alaska was, she would never have gone to Germany. She would have gone. They enjoyed it so much. Next slide. January 3rd, 1959. We were there. I don't remember it, but we were there. That's when Alaska became a state. And so these are just some of the little pieces that that my parents picked up when we were in Alaska. Next slide. So we were in Alaska for 3 years, and then came back to the lower 48. We moved to Maryland, and I picked these pictures. The first picture, my dad retired from the Army, 1961, and Christmas in 1962, where Maryland, suburbia Maryland, we called home for many years after that. That they weren't traveling as much until we went to Europe for 5 years at the end of the 60s, early 70s. So at this point, I am going to stop this section here, and I just wanted to give a little background of my mother at this point, and how maybe that you met her, and that she may have had some peculiarities, that maybe some of the story now gives you a little insight on some of those things that she had. I've learned a bunch by doing this myself. So now I'm introduce my brother again to come up.
Okay. Thank you. Next slide. Oh, there is no slide. I forgot. So as you saw in the pictures, I started out before my brother did. I was lucky. I thought I was a really lucky person for 1948 until 1955. I thought that someone left the TV on. I kept on hearing all this crying, and I thought it was a cartoon or something. And he arrived, and it all went downhill from there. I wasn't the Liebchen anymore. That was my brother, coined by my grandmother on my mother's side.
This is a different son's perspective.
Yes. This is the other. I'm sorry I don't have any slides because it looks like we're having problems with them too. But I just wanted to, during my time when I was growing up, when my brother was born, even before, there was a lot of times when I would be doing things with my mother. When we're up in Alaska, that's where I remember most of it in Atlanta before we went, was when I was up there, I was Catholic at that time, and I was an altar boy. And what I would do is my mother would go and help me with going through, because at that time, with the Catholic Church, everything was in Latin. We didn't go to English. We hadn't gone to the part where it was right after they had gone and moved the altar like we have here, because before it was always the back, the priest, and everybody else was at the back. You never, and then until they got that the priest would be on the other side, just like the pastor here. And then the altar boys would be there. So, like I said, it was all in Latin. So to get myself going, and then I became the head altar boy and taught other people. And I enjoyed it and during the summer, because there wasn't very many places you could go. You were there. So I would go, and there was another friend of mine that lived a couple doors down. We would go and serve Mass at 12 o'clock every day, Monday through Saturday, and then Sunday we would do the services. And so, like I was saying, when I was doing all that, my mother would help me, and then I'd help my mother when she was doing different plays, like she did Capella, where she was a clockmaker, and with the toys, and she would just make all these toys, and they would dance around. And also, then she was still doing ballet. So to help her with her parts, I would go and do the other person's part. And that means that I got to wear those shoes. And I think my brother did, and later on you'll find out that Michelle also used them when she was dancing ballet. So that was the time when we did a lot of stuff together. And my grandmother, she would help, and I would teach her English, she would teach me German, so that way we could all just talk German on occasion. But through the years, I guess it was long time. It became, I don't know if you noticed some of the pictures when we first started out, or my brother showed, that when I was a little bit younger, my hair was really short. And back at that time, my father was strict. So my mother was more of a referee between, and then when my brother came along, said, well, you did this to Landy, let's let Kim maybe grow his hair a little bit, as you saw in some of the photos. The afro look and all that, he got to get his hair long. Mine was either buzz cut, crew cut. So that was, and then that all changed. But with my mother, she was always fair. She always tried to help everybody. She was always doing stuff with my father and helping us to grow and to learn to be with people, to be kind to people, and until the very end. I mean, she always wanted to be a people person, which she was. And I guess I could go on, but I just can't think of anything. But it's hard to try to follow my brother with all the slides to show everything, because it's all in my mind, but that's all. Wi-Fi is, down in my brain, so I'm not picking up some of this stuff. So I know there's a lot more that I could say, but I know that more will be said when my brother gets back up here and shows more pictures. Pictures are worth 1,000 words. You can see a lot more with a picture than trying to remember your life, but it was a good life. She had a good life. She enjoyed everything until the end. She was friendly with everybody that came along. And like my brother had said earlier, because I was too young to remember a lot of the different people that we met along the way, but only remembering through the pictures that I can see how she met and how this all transgressed, or not transgressed, but went forward as to how things were happening in her life and how I met these different people. Like one of the pictures was the Trojans, and they happened to be there, and I think they stood for my parents in Germany when they got married. And they became friends, and then the child that was there, they would come to visit, and we would see him, just like everywhere we went, there was always people there that we would know, and they knew them, and they stayed in contact all the time. My father was always writing letters. He wrote them all the time, and stayed in contact with a lot of people, even though years had gone by, and then quite a few of them, they would meet elsewhere and, rejoin their friendships, renew it, I guess. So I'm glad that she was my mother. We had a lot of fun. We had some sad times, but it was a good life. And I will remember her forever and ever and ever and ever, because she is my mother. And she was also a good friend and loving. And that's all I can think of right now. So I guess the next thing is for my wife to come up and talk. And then we can get to the slides and learn more.
Well, this was not exactly how we wanted to celebrate her 100th birthday. Forgot. This is not how we wanted to spend her 100th birthday, but I'm glad that you all are here celebrating with us. Well, yesterday, after church, what we normally would have done every other Sunday, or every Sunday, or alternate with Kim and Blythe, to go to Mom's for family dinner. She liked to keep her European thing going on with eating together as a family on Sundays after church. And yesterday I was a little, antsy. I don't know who I was talking to, and I kept thinking, oh, well, we got to get out of here because we got to go get Mom's groceries, and then we got to go eat. And that didn't happen. So that was one thing that we used to enjoy doing, either together with Kim and Blythe, or we would alternate, depending upon who was doing what and where. Mrs. Angeli knew something about everything, and we had to be so careful because we never knew what she was going to quiz us with. And Lord forbid that you didn't know your geography. Oh my gosh, yeah. So you had to be very careful about that. Thank God for Google. Then, and the kings and the queens, the latest one I remember her saying is, the Queen of Spain, who is it, Charlotte? Oh, Googled it. Oh, Sophia, yes. And Juan Carlos, he was exiled. Where did he go? It just got, yeah, the phone got hot Googling. It did. And she was always up on current events. And that was the other thing we would speak until late at night sometimes, where she would talk about current events. And then we would try to solve all the world issues. But didn't happen. But one thing I will miss terribly about her is I wasn't going to do this. Is the opportunity to speak German because of my heritage and hers. She would help me and I would help her. She'd come up with a German word, couldn't think of the English word, or poor Blythe is sitting there. And I'd have to, that means this or that means that. And I enjoyed it very much talking German with her. Now, you have to understand there are different dialects, and she was the Rhineland, and that was the ish and the mish, and my mother was Bavarian, and that's the ich and the mich, that sort of thing. And my father, he was from the northern part of Germany, and that's a Plattdeutsch, and that's also another dialect. So anyhow, we'd have a lot of fun. We'd laugh. Oh, we'd laugh over things, really and truly. I think somebody else already brought up, I think Michelle brought it up already, that when we would leave here, when we'd go for dinner, one of the first things out of her mouth, what was the readings? What was the sermon about? And you know, she just wanted to know. It was just her. She just wanted to know. I can remember her telling us when we talked about church that her father would sit on a bench in what they call the allée, which was lined with chestnuts on the R River. And he'd say he enjoyed just sitting there, being among God's creations. And he told her, "This is my church." So there were just so many stories that we laughed, and we had a lot in common because of our Germanness, and a lot of stories she had to offer. And I'm going to miss her terribly. Thank you. And, okay, what do we have now? Oh, Michelle.
And back to my perspective. So these were the three pictures I picked out, one being her as a child growing up, then Landy and me as we grew up, and then the grandchildren came along. And I had mentioned earlier that I had taken out part 2 of this and kind of changed 3, and to kind of shorten things a little bit. And it was getting kind of overwhelming. It's not that I'm not thinking about everyone out there, but it was very enjoyable going down memory lane with all our friends and family. And I just wanted to say before I forgot that Charlotte mentioned about all the things that we had talked about, and we didn't know where we were going to go with her conversations, but that's the direction we went. And then all of a sudden, when we were getting ready to say something, she would go on to something else, and then back and forth. But the worst part was in the winter time, and we all had our coats on, standing at the front door trying to get out, and we'd be there up to 45 minutes with our coats on trying to get out the front door. Because we had just had coffee clutch and had coffee, and but we just had great time, laughs, and stuff. So the next slide. So the next part is the next generation. And this is something that will be the new people that come along with the family. And, we've already seen some of her fashion, and there was traveling, and, living life. For her, a lot of it became after she turned 60. And getting together again with the long-term friends that they had from earlier times. And so, next page. Next slide. That's the next page for me. So, we're going to jump right into this. Landy and Charlotte got married. And we have myself. Yeah, it looks like my hair is a little longer than I used to have it. And our aunt, my dad's sister, and Landy and Charlotte, and Oma and my mother. So my dad is not there. He had passed away in 1975, and at the age of, 56, and from heart attack. And when both Landy and I reached that point, we were very happy that we were still here, so, and that we can tell this story. And from that marriage came Michelle. And that was Nona's first grandchild. So, and of course, there are other people that aren't shown here, and in Landy's and Charlotte's family. And next slide, please. So I guess it's about almost 9 years later that I got married, and I got married to Jana Wilson, and we got married. And in this picture, has some of the same people there, my aunt, Oma, and my mother, and myself, but Landy and Charlotte with Michelle. So Michelle was less than 2 years old. And in the background are some of our relatives through on my dad's side, the Bernardinis. And I was going to say something. So speaking of Michelle, my parents got married on the 19th of April, and it just so happened that Michelle was born on the 19th of April. So it brought happiness and joy to that date, that when she would think back, she can think of Michelle. So these are my two children, Claire and Wade, who will be speaking shortly. All three. Next page. And these are the grandchildren that Nona had. Michelle, Wade, and Claire. Next slide. So for the last almost 30 years, she lived in Washington in her condo in the West End, right between DuPont Circle and Georgetown, a very nice area right on the Rock Creek Park. And she wanted to bring nature as close as possible. So she always wanted to have flowers on the balcony. And this was actually, we had to take a picture, and the reason why she's in her winter coat, because I think this was Thanksgiving, that the flowers had survived so long. Next slide, please. So, as I was making the poster, I included so many people. I tried to grab as many people that I knew, that she knew, and we were having a Zoom with Blythe's family on Saturday night, and I showed him the poster on Zoom, and Susan asked, "So, are you and Blythe in there?" I said, "Oh my God, I forgot to put us in there." So here's the picture of our wedding, and my mother was there for us to be with us there. We did not have any children, and but she was able to help Claire and Wade grow up as they and nourish their life. So next slide. So then the first grandchild got married. Claire married. No? No, first to get married. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And it was a nice event, and that my mother was able to join us, and so many of the Angeli and Merritt side of the family, and the lone Henry, I guess, in this picture, Peter. And hopefully, over time, that several of us, Charlotte, Peter, and I, Landy, Michelle, will continue trying to converse in German to keep that tradition going. Next slide. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out where I'm at. Yeah. So, the last. So, it's the last this, the last that. You just don't know that it's the last until it is. So this was dinner, Christmas dinner on Christmas Day, 2019. Landy and Charlotte, Blythe and myself, my mother, and Blythe's niece, Alana, visiting from Fort Wayne, that we had dinner together. I wanted to make a special dinner for my mother that would make her think back in the old days, making a goose with white asparagus and cranberry and wild rice and just very good taste and stuff like that for her, which she definitely enjoyed. But it turned out to actually be the last that she had dinner at someone else's house before the pandemic hit. Next, please. Oh yeah, and the last. So Christmas 2020, the day after Christmas, I went down. It was just the two of us in her place, and I made her a dinner. That we could enjoy together and reminisce. And at that time, we, as Charlotte had mentioned, that we would take turns going down there, or all four of us would come, them coming from Maryland, us coming from Virginia, meet in the middle in D.C., and be able to be with our mother there. And so the picture on the right, Mother's Day, was actually the first time that all four of us came down to my mother on the same day since March of 2020. So I think she felt that was very special, and we were vaccinated, so we were able to take our mask off for the pictures and stuff like that. So we were always conscious of that, wanting to keep her safe, and that's one reason why we limited. But it was not as hard for her as other people, because she lived her life by herself for 30 plus years, and she made the most of it by always reaching for new knowledge, always trying to learn something new. Next, please. Yeah. So generations. So when Claire was born, that little thing there on the left side, and with Oma and Nona, Helga, and me. So we were able to take a picture of the 4 generations there, and Oma had died on Christmas Eve, a month and a half after Claire was born. So on the right side is Claire grown up with Nona and myself. And we have been trying to do 4 generations, and we were going there on Sunday, and I had called her Saturday night and see if she was still up for it, and that's when she didn't answer the phone, and that we found her that night, that she had moved on. So we never got our picture, but we're there in spirit. Next slide. So Nona meets Evelyn. So she did actually meet Evelyn. First she met her through Zoom. My mother was not so keen with Zoom and stuff, computers and stuff. But when we actually had a Zoom, she said, wow, that's really neat. They're right there. You get to talk to them. But it's not quite the same as holding Evelyn in her arms. And so she was very, very, very happy to have met Evelyn. And next, thirds. So, thirds. I came up with this, and this is how I was going to divide it up, but it had a meaning. Back in June, a friend of mine heard that he had just turned 65, And I had just turned 66. And he says, well, that's the more important age. And I said, why? Is that because of Social Security? He said, no, it's because of thirds. And I wasn't quite sure what he meant. But it dawned on me, I was 66. My mother was 99. Claire was 33. And the baby was 0. And 33 years on each one. Yeah. So that's how I was going to divide it up, as I was born, as Claire was born. But then life gets rearranged, and so did this. So next will be Michelle. To the grandchildren.
As so many stories and memories have been shared already, the one main thing that Uncle Kim shared is, yes, I was born on Nona Angeli's birthday, wedding anniversary, and it was always sad for her to remember, but as soon as I was born, I brought the joy back into her life of remembering of many different things. One thing I will say that I will definitely miss about my grandmother is that she always allowed us to be creative, to always make sure we're sticking with some kind of art related, either drawing or singing or play acting, as Claire Wade and I would always put together these long productions that kind of feel like how it happened today, that something goes wrong and we're just coming up with something on the fly. And it always comes out in the end. She's always supported that. My one common thing that I had with her is dance. As my dad said, her painting of her dancing has always been present in every location, when she lived in Bowie to when she moved to DC. And we always had that connection of dance, of music, and just being together. As growing up, I only ever knew both of my grandmothers. So having her also helped share memories of Grandpa Angeli. But the shoes, there were many times that this was way before I was even taking dance, that she would be like, oh, let's go put the shoes on and go dance around. And she would show me how to do different little positions. And as I got older, I finally did make to a dance recital on point. And she has the VHS of it that she would play it all the time, just to watch me doing something that she also loved to do. And yeah, the main part that I will miss of her is the laughing, the always wanting to find out more. She was also very fascinated by where did we come from? How did we start? Where did we go? She was always so fascinated about space. And so when she had passed, I had already in my mind thought, I'm going to do something to memorialize her and have her with me always. So I had a glass blown piece, which is, I can show people later, it's the galaxy, and it has her ashes in it. So she's sort of sharing that, she's part of that galaxy now. And maybe that's why they found a phone in her hand when she passed, that maybe she just found out where we came from, and she wanted to tell us. And we don't know. So I will miss her dearly. I love you, Nona. Happy birthday. And Claire, my cousin.
Hi, I'm Claire. I hate talking in front of people, so I'll probably be reading mainly off of it. But I'm glad I have the opportunity to talk today. I went back and forth whether or not to do this, but I knew if I didn't do it, I would be really upset. So one of the things I loved most about her was her energy. I always said she was the Energizer Bunny. She just kept going and going and going. She was always on the move and always willing to go out and explore the world. I was lucky enough to have her live close by as I was growing up. When I was young, she lived in Bowie. I only have a few memories from that. I can still picture part of the house that she lived in and her little red BMW parked out front. I remember her cooking cow's tongue and being surprised I actually liked it. I remember sneaking Ricola cough drops and her laughing at me because they were way too strong for me and I was making funny faces. My favorite memory is the walks that we went on in the neighborhood. There was this wooden horse head that was in the bushes. I don't know where it was or if it was a neighbor or something, but we would just stop and I wanted to say hello to it, and one time she let me put makeup on it. Eventually she moved to her condo in DC, and most of the summers I would come stay with her for about a week, either by myself or Michelle would come. We always went on walks every day. Sometimes we would walk around the corner to the bread and chocolate shop, run errands in DuPont Circle, or walk through Georgetown and go down to the waterfront and have ice cream. We would go swimming at the local public pool, go down the street to see a movie, and almost always spent time at the Kennedy Center. We would go see a ballet or a musical, or sometimes just see what was going on at the Millennium Stage. We spent a lot of time just talking. She loved to listen to what was happening in my life, as well as tell me stories from the past. Watching the Arts Channel, listening to classical music, sitting on the balcony, or going up on the roof, or playing dress up with all her fashionable clothes. She loved food and always cooked amazing meals. Everything was fresh. She never owned a microwave. We would have European-style breakfast every morning, toast with cheese and meat. I discovered my love for prosciutto that way. And of course, butter. She loved her butter. She could not get enough of it. I remember one time, she literally had a small piece of toast, like a crumb, took off another slice of butter, put it on, and ate it. I was like, what are you doing? That's so much more butter than toast. She just laughed. She was like, I love my butter. In the afternoon, we would do coffee clutch. She would have coffee, and I would have tea. And we would share a little dessert, something that we usually got earlier in the day. All of these memories I will cherish forever, and remember how lucky I was to spend those summers with her. As I got older, I started figuring out what I wanted to do as a career, and like Nona, I too went into the medical field. She was always interested in discussing what I was learning in my classes while getting my biology and surgical technologist degrees. She loved hearing about the surgeries I had assisted with and the different technologies I would work with. Even as she got older, she was still fascinated with new innovations in the medical field and wanted to keep learning. I'm so grateful of all the time we spent together. She was able to attend my high school and college graduations, watch me get married, and meet her great-granddaughter. Grandchild, yes. She will always be an important part of my upbringing, and I will never forget what she taught me and encouraged me to do in life. I love you, Nona, and happy birthday. Now, my brother Wade will come up.
I can go up that way, right? So I didn't write anything because I knew that I would be speaking after everybody else. So a lot of the things that everybody's already said were things that I wanted to say, especially like about the butter. Especially because I've never been the biggest fan of butter, but just a few weeks ago, like it's fine, like it's great, but not like her. I actually, I made jam for the first time. I moved out to Seattle this summer, and I picked blackberries and made jam. And when I was making jam on toast, I decided, for Nona to slap it up with some butter to do her good. So one thing about me is that as the youngest grandchild, I was the ultimate Liebchen. Everyone was a Liebchen at one point for her, but as her dear baby, but I was the ultimate Liebchen, and that afforded me a lot of privilege that I could get away with a lot, or I could do no harm. Where, even when I looked my worst, she would always find things to compliment me on, saying that I looked nice even though my hair was out to here and I was covered in acne. But I just remember one of the things, if nothing else, she would say, tighten up and spank you and say, nice firm butt. And she liked that. I think that we had a lot in common, of course. One thing about her, as you knew, and I want to say thank you to my family for organizing this and for my dad putting together all the pictures. I know that her love of photos and collecting memories lives throughout our family, especially, I personally don't remember anything unless I take a picture. So I really appreciate that she's always loved photos and said that they're the most valuable thing to her to remember. So that definitely lives with me. She was very independent, living alone for all of my life, and she's very independent, and I felt like that was instilled in me as well. When I learned the more that I traveled and lived abroad that she also was there at some point in her life in Europe, in Italy or Spain. I lived in Spain, and although I didn't ever study German, I studied Spanish. Claire and I studied Spanish in elementary school, but when I lived in Spain and Costa Rica, I picked it back up, and she was very happy that even though I wasn't doing German, that I spoke Spanish, and she always had fond memories of vacationing with friends in Spain. Like Michelle said, she encouraged us to be creative and was such a big lover of the arts. And I grew up doing art, making art, and she was always very supportive and very inspirational for me as well. I always said she was just like my favorite person if, sorry. Like if you're like a kid and you're like, write about your hero or like write about someone you inspire, she was always the first one that came to mind. I really liked showing her off to my friends. Just like in high school, going into DC for weekend trips and visiting her to have lunch or something. I always loved showing her off, and she always really liked my friends too, because we were interested in doing stuff in learning and the arts and everything. And she became infamous to my friends just because she was like the coolest grandma ever, especially because she looked killer up until her last day. Her hair only just started to gray a few years ago, and she always dressed to the nines, and wore Chanel and cologne, like perfume, and really nice jewelry. And so I'm not like a fashionista, but she was an icon to me, and I appreciate that stuff more because of her. When I would visit her in DC, like Claire mentioned, we would go on walks and look around, and one thing that I remember, she really loved the cherry blossoms, of course. They reminded her of her time in Japan, and so we would go almost every year to go see the cherry blossoms growing up. And we would also go and just walk all over the city. When the city put on like statues, like their animal sculptures, like they did the pandas and they each were like painted or covered in decorations. They did that a couple times with different animals, and I would always go, and we would go around and try and take pictures with as many as possible. She was extremely photogenic, as you've seen, so she was in front of the camera, and I enjoyed taking pictures of her. Just after I lived abroad, I ended up moving home, and then I got a job in DC, so I was finally able to move to DC, a city that I had always admired because we would go there so much to visit Nona, and I thought it was just really funny that I ended up living on basically the same street off of N Street, just like 20 blocks away. So I could even just ride my bike over and go visit her, and I would bring my roommates over a couple times, and they would just be in awe of all the stories. And I think my dad started to mention one where she like got shot at the field hospital, or got shot at, and my just casually, like, oh yeah, back when I was, yeah, and then we were shot at, and my friends just like, what? Like, excuse me, what are you talking? Like, just everyone had so much respect for her because she had lived such an incredible life, with so many experiences, and it was oftentimes in disbelief, and we are like, do you remember this correctly? And a lot towards the later years, we were always piecing things together, but you could always see that like spark in her eye when she's like, can you remind me? Or like, what was that? Like Charlotte mentioned, that it would always like click, and she's like, yes, thank you, you remembered it, because she just held so much, and I'm just so happy that she was able to, stay with it and have all those memories up until the end. One last thing that I was able to, share with her, although I didn't get to see her like at all during the pandemic, anytime I traveled, I would bring her books because I like to collect like nonfiction books or art books, and I would collect them, and I would bring them to her because I didn't have immediate use for them, but I would want them so that I could share with her. And she was always very excited, like we've said, that she was always wanting to continue to learn. And so she would, always get my books, and she'd be so excited, and she'd want to talk to me about them afterwards. And so that was really nice to share, even though we couldn't, go somewhere else. But yeah, so that's I think that's all the things that I wanted to say. I do think I know this is a church, but I feel like we should have a drink and cheers to her for her 100th birthday, but that'll come after, I guess. So happy birthday, Nona. I love you. Obviously, never forget you. And I'm just glad that we could be here together. And I'm glad that I could come visit back now that I've moved out west, just like she did at one point. And hopefully I can steal some of her remains so I could take it to the Pacific with me, where she lived. All right, thanks. I don't know who exactly is.
So I will just introduce Susan Merritt. Good friends of mine, Frank and Jacqueline. Frank was one of my close friends when living in Germany back in the 70s. And they live locally here, but they're in New Mexico right now, being with her family there. And she wrote a little memory last night, and they sent it to us. And Blythe and I called Susan up last night and asked her if she would read it, and she said that she would. And so we were happy, and when they found out that someone would read it, they were happy too. So, yeah, I'll let Susan say the words.
Memories of Helga. When I first met Frank, he talked about his friends, but one person's name kept coming up in conversation over and over again, Helga. He told me she was the mother of one of his close friends, Kim, and that the two families had grown close over the years when they bonded together while living in Germany. Frank explained that she was a beautiful, cultured person who loved literature, music, and art, and that she was an accomplished ballet dancer. I was also a dancer and was quite intrigued to meet this lady. I finally met Helga one night in a restaurant in Adams Morgan, and I could understand at once why this person had become such an important part of Frank and his mother Margaret's lives. I got to know Helga over the years, and she enriched my life as well. What struck me from the beginning was her joie de vivre. This lady loved life and took advantage of every moment to extract whatever it had to offer. I was to see this time and again in India, where Helga and Margaret came to visit us during our 10-month trip through Asia after we got married. Traveling in India was not easy, but she was game for adventure every day. We traveled by taxi to Rajasthan, and once we arrived, she climbed into a jeep with us, and we headed off to an area where there was a cave. We were to hike up to the cave in order to watch the sunset and experience the bats leaving the cave to dine on insects. Helga wore a colorful blue skirt and top with rickrack trim and sandals, but resolutely kept up with us. We sat at the mouth of the cave, and as bats began whizzing by us, but never bumping into us, we watched the sky turn from pale blue to a darker blue, and then violet, blending with a pale gold to a deep amber color, and from a soft coral to a deeper salmon, and then red as the sun set. The colors all happened simultaneously and were somehow illuminated with a fiery glow. After about 15 minutes, the bats returned to the cave, flying between us so that air brushed our faces, yet we never felt even the tip of a wing. When hiking back to the jeep, she mentioned that her feet were sore, and we asked our host if we could go a little slower. Our host was later startled when we told him Helga was 65. He could not believe it. Then our host arranged for us to go on a camel safari, and Helga was enthused with the idea. The four of us started out, and only Helga and I went for the long ride. The camels loped along, and after a few hours, our guide stopped. I cannot remember how we communicated, but somehow we knew it was time for lunch. We dismounted the camels and stretched our limbs in the sand. Helga was very interested to watch the guides gather camel dung to fuel the fire they had built, and said she was going to write to Kim and tell him all about it. We settled in an area where colorful quilts had been laid out, and she composed a letter to Kim. After our lunch, we headed to some ruins where the guides indicated we could nap on small woven rugs. And after a few hours, we refreshed and resumed our camel ride back to the depot. Later that night, we had dinner, and a troupe of musicians came by and performed for us and encouraged everyone to dance, and we did. Even Frank danced, and Helga said, "I've never seen Frank dance like that before." We happened to be in India for the celebration of Holi, and our hosts urged us to stay indoors for fear of being pelted with water balloons filled with colored water. Helga had learned that it was a local custom and felt that we should certainly not miss out in participating, We went for a walk in the village where there was much revelry in certain quarters, and soon enough we were soaked with water and covered with so much paint that we needed to dry off before going back into the hotel. But we had a great time. In one of our last nights in Delhi, we stayed in a restaurant talking with the Sikh owner, a turbaned gentleman with a long beard. He asked about getting a taxi back to our hotel, and he was enjoying the conversation so much that he assured us he could get us back. We assumed he had a car, and a few hours later, he roared up on a motorcycle and asked who wanted to go first. We were astonished but game, and we watched as he and Helga disappeared into the Delhi night. He did come back for the rest of us, however, and all was well. Despite the great fun we had, Helga did have physical difficulties and suffered upper extremity pain that prevented her from staying in the damp humidity of a houseboat in Kashmir. She decided to stay in a hotel where she could sleep in a more comfortable environment, and never once did she complain of any discomfort. This, I learned, was typical for her. It was in her nature to try and make the best of any situation. Our trip ended, and back in Maryland, we continued to see Helga for birthdays, holidays, and the like. When I graduated from Howard University in 1998, Helga came to the graduation along with Margaret and my family. After the ceremony, we went to have dinner at a Vietnamese restaurant. It was quite late, the place was not too busy, and we felt fortunate to have found anything open at that hour. There was tango music playing, and Helga was talking about how much she loved the tango. The owner of the restaurant happened to be walking by our table, overheard her, and said, "Would you like to dance?" Helga said, "Of course." And after he cleared a few tables and chairs out of the way, they tangoed around the room to the delight of the diners. He thanked Helga, seated her again, and then served us dinner. Helga's ability to be spontaneous and to seize each moment that presented itself to enjoy life was evident again. The last time I met with Helga, it was my great pleasure to have cooked a German dinner for her. Frank and I carted it up to her apartment, and her eyes grew wide as he pulled out beef rouladen, cooked red cabbage, roasted potatoes, and a Käsekuchen. Yeah, Käsekuchen, made with cork. I could not find cork, and I had to make it up. I had to end up making it, but it was worth it to see Helga's reaction. She said, "Oh, like my mama's." Helga poured the wine, and we enjoyed a long, leisurely dinner and animated conversation. For me, those memories show that Helga's joie de vivre was always present, and this has always been an inspiration to me. Her love of life, friends and family, her great pleasure in imbibing good meals, concerts, movies, and her ability to appreciate beauty in the smallest insignificant things, such as the scent of a flower or a seashell, all made her the special person that she was and will continue to be for so many of us. So those are Jacqueline's words, and I just want to add one line of my own. My family of four were relative latecomers to her extended family. She always treated us with the same love and respect as everyone else, and we appreciated her warmth and wisdom. Thank you, Helga.
My name is Ari Hirano, and I met Miss Helga almost 30 years ago. I could share with you so many stories, so many things about her that we all know, how elegant she was, how kind she was, and how she could coax out our better selves by just talking to us in just the way she used to. What I will take with me is that she made my life better for just being here. She made this world a better place. She taught me about kindness. She taught me about steadfastness, about loyalty. I'll miss her. I'll miss her very, very much. But I find comfort in knowing that she's in a better place, that she's all looking over us, that she's back wearing her beautiful heels, and that I'll see her again. So with that, I wish we could all have been here with her for her 100th birthday, but I know she's having a big, huge party up there. So cheers to Miss Helga. Thank you.
Greetings from rainy, thank God, California. This is Brett Merritt here, Blythe's older brother. My connection to Helga comes out of the close Merritt-Angeli bonds that have grown over the years since Blythe and Kim got together. Distance prevents me from being there in person, but I would be remiss if I did not add a few words to this life celebration for Helga Angeli, mother to Landy and Kim, mother-in-law to my sister. I have not known her as long or as well as most of you, but let me just say this. She was one of the most charming, interesting, and engaging humans that I have ever met. 2 words tell it all about Helga. She loved life. Well, that's 3 words. She was a force of nature, but in a good way. Had a sparkle of life and twinkle in her eye that simply lit up the room. I loved to hear the stories she told in her wonderful accent, with a sprinkling of German words thrown in for good measure. She was smart, cultured, and well-read and opinionated. An example of that is right after the invasion of Iraq, post 9/11, I was kind of on the invasion bandwagon, like a lot of people were. And she was simply dead set against it and very critical of it. And I got a little upset with her opinion, but she turned out to be absolutely right. And she had the courage to speak her mind about what she believed at the time. God bless her. Yet, based on the stories that she told, she knew hardship and tragedy that I am personally unable to conceive of, yet she beamed with a joyous love of life regardless. She was a dear friend to our beloved mom, Elaine Merritt. She loved all of us Merritts from her heart, including my wife Peggy, our kids, Drew, Heather, Tony, and Christina, and our grandkids, Emma and Jack. She will be missed, but let us be inspired by her example of how to live deeply, joyously, and fully. Thank you, and God bless you, Helga.
I think I need to take this off so you can hear me. I will try to project. I'm like the front end of the latecomer Merritt crew to the Angeli family, having met Mom Helga in the late 1990s. I married Kim in 2014 and officially became a daughter-in-law of this amazing woman. Before I go on, I want to add my butter story. Sometime in the early, mid to late 90s, I was having I think it was an office gathering at my house, and Kim was with the people that Kim and I both worked with, and so we had food out on the table, and Kim was the first one to get there, and he brought his 2 kids. He brought Claire and Wade, and they made a beeline to the table, and they got these delicious rolls that we had out, and they piled them high with butter. And I thought, is he starving his children? But then that's the first thing I learned about Helga, is that how much she loves butter. So Kim explained that they had learned that from their grandmother. So even though Helga and I are very different in terms of earthy versus cultured, she always seemed to accept differences, I mean, forever, I guess, accept differences in people and cultures as something to be explored. So it was okay for me to be different.
And it turned out that we have some things in common. Little things like she was born exactly 1 year after my mother was born, and she married Orlando 1 year and a day after my parents married, both just post-World War II marriages. And big things like our deep relationship and love affair with nature. That is why I asked to be the one to read this poem. I'm going to read the, probably says, oh, no. I'm going to read the poem that she had. She had it printed in German on the wall in her entryway in her condo. And that was a good place for her to be able to, good light there, she could stand there and explain it to people like me, translate it and explain it to people like me who don't know a lick of German. But before I get to the poem, before I read the poem, I want to mention one other thing that we had in common in more recent years, which also relates to a reverence for nature. As I became more and more bent on discontinuing my use of plastics for the health of the planet and its inhabitants, it turned out that she was a strong ally for me in that effort, because she had never succumbed to the hype about plastic being the wonders of plastic and that we all need it to make our lives better. So back to the poem. The original German poem, My Lied, and that was the music that was playing before we actually started today. Well, the music by Beethoven, but the poem was written by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe in 1771. And it seems to defy a single strict translation to English while maintaining the character of the poem. And I think I've learned that that's typical for German to English translations. In searching for official translations, we found a wide range of interpretations for that reason. So the poem became popularly known as May Song when Beethoven put it to music. And that's the music that was playing before we started the program today. This translation, interpretation by Richard Stokes, seems to be consistent with Helga's explanations of the poem to me and others. May Song. How gloriously nature gleams for me, how the sun sparkles, how the field laughs. Blossoms burst from every bough, 1,000 voices from every bush, and delight and rapture from every breast. O earth, O sun, O joy, O bliss, O love, so golden fair as morning clouds on yonder hills. You bless with glory the fresh field, in a mist of blossom the teeming world. O maiden, maiden, how I love you, how you look at me, how you love me. The skylark loves song and air, and morning flowers the hazy sky. As I with warm blood love you, who give me youth and joy, and heart for new songs and new dances, be happy always, as in your love for me. Thank you. Oops.
Well, it's me again. So I just want to get my few last words in. And so we heard a little thing from Eri Harano, and we appreciate that. Back on June 1st, we had just gotten back from her getting her second vaccination, and there was a knock on the door. And it was Eri and her husband, Mike. They had dropped by. They had gone shopping in Georgetown or DuPont Circle, and they saw this dessert And they said, we wanted to give this beautiful dessert to a beautiful woman. So they stopped by to give it to her. So, next. So, we want to toast to you, Mom, Nona, Helga, your happy birthday, 100th birthday. Here we are, the very last gathering that we had in our house back the holidays of 2019. And she wasn't quite up to it. She had had a little cold or something, so she didn't want to bring her germs to us. So she stayed home. And I see that we all have a glass in there, and I can't quite remember if that's what we were doing, was toasting her because she wasn't there. But we wanted to now go ahead and say, we toast you. Happy birthday, Mom. We all love you. Next. Got all those names and stuff, and just have to keep on going over and over. Okay.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's why sometimes I start, because if you don't talk about it, you forget.
Yeah.
Because every day you have different input, you know. And if you don't talk about it and think, then you forget it.
And that's true. So, so every Sunday we had our talks, we asked questions, we tried to hear the stories, and we heard some stories multiple times, some new stories. But and probably the ones that we've heard multiple times that we remember. So you just got to keep on talking about it. And so we honor those people who died by telling their story. And that's what I was trying to do today. That's what everyone was trying to do today. And we appreciated that everyone had come to listen. So I do have something to say about butter. So this could be the origins of why. So during World War II, things were pretty rough and food was rationed. They would get a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and they would get 1 pound of butter a month. And instead of putting a little teeny bit on there, they said, well, screw that, let's taste it. And so they would put a lot of butter on, and it may be gone in 2 days instead of a month, but they enjoyed it. They really enjoyed it when they had it. And as Blythe mentioned, her mother and Blythe, her mother Elaine and Blythe, and my mother and I, we went on walks several times. And I remember the first time we went out to this place in Virginia, in Centerville, and we noticed that Blythe and Elaine kept on looking at the ground as they walked. They just kept on looking down. And that my mother and I, we were always looking up. They were looking at the minuscule, what was down there on the ground, and we were looking at the wide world of nature that was given to us. So it was pretty funny that we just had different interpretations of nature and what we viewed. Never stop exploring. Use the mind to continue to explore every day. So that was one thing that she was. Every day that we'd talk on the phone, we wouldn't know if it was going to be 15 minutes, a half an hour, 2 hours on the phone, because we would just keep on going off on different stories, and she really enjoyed that. And of course, our visits, not knowing where we were going. And she was so fascinated that when we didn't have a question, we would get on our phones, and within a few seconds, we had an answer. And she thought, that is just phenomenal. It is phenomenal how everything is just so quick at our fingertips now. But there are so many times now that during this time, and I mentioned earlier, that she did know a lot of things, and she always wanted to know more and more and more. And And that was how she kept her mind. We were so happy that she was able to live her life. She was able to live in her life in her condo. She lived by herself till she was 99 with no assistance, and except us bringing food and stuff and visiting with her. But she had her mind 110%. And so we were very blessed at that. Others are not quite so fortunate. So we talked about traveling and art and music, culture, good food, and these were things I got from her. And a lot of things that Wade said he got from her, and it was really from me, that I got from her, yeah. So, but it was good. And as for medical, I ran the other way. So Claire, I'm glad she took that up. So I just wanted to have a little bit. So the soundbite, back in 2014, because she would start telling stories, and the only way we'd remember some of these stories was to start recording. So we got a little recorder, and then later we started recording on the phone. But in 2014, so this was one of those audios that we just started listening to like 2 weeks ago, and just started, some of the recordings were up to 5.5 hours long. You know, it was like, wow, it just kept on going, like the bunny, right? Yeah. So about her traveling, and next, the Wanderlust. Where shall I go next? So I looked up different interpretations of Wanderlust. You know, they listed a bunch of things. And I saw this one, and, you know, it kind of fit her. Don't just travel to take a break from life. Travel to give something it deserves. And it's so true. And so she's on her next journey. And all of us will be on other journeys, and we will think of her often. So, thank you.
Sono solo sogno l'orizzonte manca le parole. Si lo se c'è non lo c'è una stanza quanto manca sole. Se non ci sei tu con me su le finestre mostra tutti il mio cuore che ho acceso. Dentro me la luce che hai trovato per strada. Time to say goodbye. Paese che non adesso si vivrò con te, partirò su navi per mari che lo so, it's time to say goodbye. Quando sei lontana sogno l'orizzonte manca le parole. Io solo sei c'è con me, tu mi luna, tu sei qui con me. Io solo tu si qui con me, con me, con me, con me. Time to say
I need to recover from that. Now, concerning brotherly love, you have no need for anyone to write to you, for you yourselves have been taught by God to love one another. For that indeed is what you are doing to all the brothers throughout Macedonia. But we urge you, brothers, to do this more and more, and to aspire to live quietly, and to mind your own affairs, and to work with your hands as we instructed you, so that you may walk properly before outsiders and be dependent on no one. But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep, that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. For this we declare to you by a word from the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will always be with the Lord. Therefore, encourage one another with these words.
And as we have reached the end of our celebration, thank you for joining us. And it appeared as though as Nona joined us today and extended our celebration a little longer than we had thought. So thank you, Nona. And as we close this afternoon now, please join me in saying the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. As we are continuing, there is some food downstairs for those that are still here to join us. Also, there was a closing slideshow, but it's a little lengthy, so we'll have it playing, and people, if they want to stay or look at the pictures out in the narthex, you may do so. There'll be music playing as well.
Du bist heut so anders, was hast du, Cherie? Hast du eine andere, dann sag's mir, Cherie. Ich bin dir nicht böse, gesteht's ruhig ein. Schließlich leben wir doch, um glücklich zu sein. Sage nur der andern, wenn's sein muss, Cherie. Eine hätte dich so geliebt wie noch nie. Aber findest du nicht bei ihr das ganz große Glück? Bring ein bisschen Liebe mir wieder zurück. Ich bat dich heute zu mir zu kommen. Das habe ich als Anlass genommen. Ich will dich schon seit Tagen was fragen. Und so kann ich es besser dir sagen. Du bist heut so anders. Was hast du, Cherie? Hast du eine andere? Dann sag's mir, Cherie. Ich bin dir nicht böse, gesteht's ruhig ein. Schließlich leben wir doch, um glücklich zu sein. Sage nur der anderen, wenn's sein muss, Cherie. Eine hätte dich so geliebt wie noch nie. Aber findest du nicht bei ihr das ganz große Glück? Bring ein bisschen Liebe mir wieder zurück.
Vamos al paradis, Haïti. Quand je me rappelle tes forêts si belles, tes grands horizons, breuvage, la plus belle cage n'est qu'une prison. Mon désir, mon cri d'amour, Haïti, c'est de te revenir un jour. Oh, beau pays bleu, bien loin, sous d'autres cieux, je vivais des jours heureux. Mais tout est fini seul dans mon exil aujourd'hui.